Welcome to Lunar Alchemy. This is John speaking here with Bella Crystal, and we are working with the sun's transit through gate 42. So today we're going to be discussing gene key 42, which moves from the shadow of expectation to the city of celebration. And it is the pathway of detachment. And we're also going to be looking at the archetype of the nomad, which I'm very excited about. We've entered into the codon ring of life and death, which, even though that sounds kind of sounds extreme to me when I think of it, I really appreciate these particular gene keys and how they work together to provide a deeper understanding of this pathway of being a spirit in a body, being a body with a spirit. Wherever we are on that journey, I feel like these gene keys give us a very deep awareness of what it is that we're actually looking at. So today is Moon Day, or Monday, as we usually pronounce it. So I'm excited that we are now hosting on the day of the week that is dedicated to the moon, as we're going to be looking at how the elements of our experience can be transmuted in some form to harmonize along with this solar transit through gate 42 and with the reflections we receive from the moon. So, Bella, there's probably a lot going on with this particular energy that we could discuss, but I just want to ask you in a very open way, what do you notice about life and death as it relates to the nomad?
That beginnings and endings sometimes aren't that clear. And it's more about cycles somehow. And I feel it's interesting today as well that we are doing this without going live. We are doing it in a new way. But in my head, I was not completely clear on that. And I also have not informed anybody. So the only information that's been done is you and Ashley. So in my world, somehow this is not finished yet, is what I'm noticing. And also that we decided in the last archetype to do it in a new way would kind of also not make sense. It makes sense to start doing this in the third archetype next year, which is what Richard Rudd says, that's the start of the deconditioning wheel. That's the eternal child. That's where we start and that's where we come back to. So I feel like there is something with the 42 that for me feels a bit like the Fool, in the tarot card. So I feel like the Fool is kind of making us, is the Fool looking back? Is the Fool looking forward? That's also interesting when you look at the tarot. And I'm recently doing a course on the Kabbalah. And in Hebrew, you read not like we do here from left to right, you read the other way. So then it actually looks like the Fool is looking into the past. So what is it that we are finishing up today? What is it before in next week, that is happening? And I think it's interesting too. We usually have more people, even when we're going live, we have more people inside than just a few people that are here today. So I believe that this archetype is here and kind of not making fun of us, but just saying, are you so sure this is the ending or this is the start, or and maybe that's the thing. When you think sometimes in life, this is really an ending, somehow it might already be the beginning of something new. So I definitely feel that there is something with a rethinking or reinterpretation of what endings and beginnings are in this archetype.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up all of those points. I mean, to think about, for one thing, gene key 3 and the city of innocence. Isn't that right? And thinking about how that, if you combine that with the nomad, what you get is the Fool. And in a way, we're kind of stuck with the Fool because and not in a bad way necessarily. It's one of my favorite archetypes out there. But here we are in these bodies, and we are completely ruled by the passage of time. And no matter how much our brains can wrap themselves around this idea that time doesn't exist, that it's an illusion or whatever we want to talk about from the perspective of quantum physics or other perspectives that suggest that time is an illusion, we're going to still experience the passage of time by the cycles that are ruling our physical bodies, by the cycles that rule our emotional waves. For anyone watching who is in a defined an emotional authority in your human design, and even by the cycles of our thinking patterns. We don't often think about thinking patterns as having cycles, but they certainly do, because all of our thoughts are in some way a result of our conditioning. And those conditions by nature are going to be run in cycles. So when we have any particular experience, we're going to go through a cycle of thoughts that occur to us before we may be able to break out into something new, to have a new idea. We're going to think through all the old ideas first. So this idea of the cycles is really, I'm glad it's a big part of this one, because I think our experience of cycles is so colored by the shadow of this particular gene key. We either want to run away from the cycles, or we want to squash them down so that nothing ever starts, so, or we keep starting things so that they never end, and never get committed. So there's an interesting quality to this archetype that is perfectly in tune with the endings and the beginnings. And I think it's because it doesn't consider them as beginnings or endings. It's just part of the celebration of life, So I feel like cycles show up, Bella, in so many different ways in our lives, in our relationships, in our own personal growth patterns. There's the 7-year cycle that is talked about so much in the gene keys. What are the cycles what makes it so challenging for us to complete a cycle? What allows us to begin and end cycles in a more graceful way? What's going on inside of us that is causing this sort of like back and forth of resistance to the endings or the death of a period, or not completing a task, or not putting our keys in the right place when we walk inside the door so we can find them again? Like this, there's so many layers we could look at this, but what's going on inside of us that is causing this sort of conflict? And then at other times we move seamlessly into these new beginnings and allow endings to happen in the most graceful way.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I definitely can think back to times when I have been stuck, and I've seen people being stuck in situations that seem just not ideal. And you look back at your life and you're like, if I just would have ended that 2 years earlier, it would have been so much better. And as I'm sitting here today with you, I'm also thinking, if you're not finishing it, you're not ready. Like there is something here choiceless with it. Like if you're in it, you're obviously not ready to move on. So also trust that when a cycle is still there and it's not ending, maybe you need to be in that space, because if you just would like get catapulted out of it, maybe you would need to like, you know, kind of like a pilot. If you couldn't land that plane in a safe way, you catapulted yourself out, maybe you're going to be with another plane and you're going to have to land safely. So for me, in one way, I think that those times when we have been too long in a cycle, that's what allows us to not go into the same thing again. And if we do, well, maybe then we should ask ourselves, like, how many times am I supposed to do this until I'm done? So to not judge the cycle that's lingering wrong either, I actually think it might be even more detrimental to just end something before it has bled out, kind of wanted to bleed out, and then you can you can put on some band-aid and you can let it heal. But yeah, what's that if that is the way we look? And here I would say this could definitely, in mechanics, if we speak about human design, this could be the challenge between the 42 and the 53. The 53 is the initiator. It just wants to start and it loves starting. And the 42 actually wants to finish. Ashley has the 42.4 in her culture, I believe it is. And she really likes to end things before she starts new things. She really likes to focus and end, and then a new beginning. And I actually like to initiate. I don't have the 53, but I like to see the direction, know where we're going. And sometimes I'm bored by those details that have to be done to kind of like close things. So it can definitely be a personal preference when it comes to ending or beginnings. And I would say what you are speaking to as well is that when we can have a healthy balance and know that we don't have to jump out of a cycle just because it's uncomfortable. We can stay with it until we kind of have completed the cycle. And then because of that, there is a more harmonious way into going into the next cycle.
Yeah. It's, as often strikes me in our discussions, Bella, this interplay of feminine and masculine forms always kind of comes forward in our discussions from the way that I tend to ask questions. And when we consider this movement of life and how the cycles of our life are processed through us, how we engage with them, how we respond to them. When we look at it from a structural perspective, maybe a more masculine idea, one where beginnings and endings are clear and definite and set, as opposed to a somewhat more receptive approach where the ending is less defined, the beginnings are less defined. Because, if we think about even just what's coming to mind is the process of becoming a mother. There's so much that happens with a very first pregnancy in a woman's life that is ending and beginning all at once, and it's all part of the same. And even at the birth of the child, the same experience occurs. Whereas from perhaps the masculine perspective, while things begin to, there is bringing their child through gestation, the physical body experience isn't such that there's so much change occurring inside that male, the father's body, until that definite moment when the birth happens. Now everything's different. And I'm speaking about this because it feels to me, as we move in a process of harmonizing our inner masculine and feminine relationships, that there's space for both experiences. That when we come to the end of a cycle, if we sort of maybe preemptively cut it off in a somewhat reactionary masculine fashion, before it's really done. And then it shows up again later against our wishes. We can bring our awareness to the fact that, hey, maybe I wasn't finished with this yet. And that assists with that inner integration of the two different ways. Likewise, if a cycle has ended and we've been unwilling to draw that line and step forward into the new, we're kind of like hanging on to something while it's after it's already done, you know. That's helping us to learn what we need to do to step forward into something new. And it always strikes me as kind of magical when a person can have that quality of detachment that allows them to be absolutely involved in their experience of life. You know, that when a lot of people are learning about this concept of detachment, whether it's from studying some form of meditation or Buddhism or wherever that's coming from, oftentimes the detachment seems like like moving away, like a sick line on that's been doubled over itself in its avoidance of being affected by the world. You're not like on the roof, you're on the roof of a skyscraper. You're so far removed that nothing touches you. But what the gift of this particular archetype allows us to be is fully involved in living, while also carrying that detachment along with us, and actually being in some ways more involved than if we have a great many attachments. I wonder how you see, you know, attachments can kind of look like when we talk about attachments in relationship. Sometimes that's talked about as a negative quality. And I wonder how you see energetically how we make attachments to things or people or places. And is it a negative or positive thing? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it holding us back from growing? What's the deal with attachments, and how does this archetype help us like process this in some way? Yeah, Terry, attached to wounds.
You know, it's definitely human. I think that's the first thing to say about it. It's definitely human to want to be safe, because that's the first thing. And we can look at Maslow's scale, you know, the first safety, the first survival, and we can place that on things or on people. And I think that is human. And the first step, like with everything, is to be aware of it, because it can lead us into a situation where we, like you say, we stay in something, a situation or a relationship longer than we need to, just because we are attached, because it gives us this false sense of safety. Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. So it's not necessarily good. It's not necessarily helpful. I don't think that really the whole thing. I think in a lot of my spirituality, where I like went really deep 15 years ago, more or less, it was that non-attachment, you know, and I misunderstood non-attachment from detachment. And in a sense, it's not like the gift frequency of this gene key. Like I thought the detachment was to let go. And then you have nothing. And you think that, because my teacher used to say, you cannot let go or detach from a little bit at a time. You cannot one day say, oh, I don't need my Rolex anymore. Oh, I don't need my dog anymore. Oh, I don't need my boyfriend anymore. No, like it's either you're attached or you're detached. So I thought that I just have to do all this. So I just did this with my life at that point. And I found myself on the floor like a paralyzed animal like a year later, in a corner, like feeling cornered, literally. And I was like, oh, maybe there was something that didn't need to be done this with. What if I would have been able to just do this and still have my I didn't have a Rolex at the point at the time, but like if I could have everything, and you know, so probably it's the awareness of possible attachment, and then see if we can create more space in relationship to each one of these things. That would be, I believe, the healthiest way of going about it.
Yeah, so rather than taking a sort of conscious, intentional approach to throwing things away from you in order to become free somehow, because that's a pathway that isn't learned or that we want to explore, for instance. Learning to instead simply relax our grip and allow things that want to stay so that we can appreciate them, and allow the things to go that are ready to go. It sounds like the difference between those things is a tremendous trust in the process of life, in providing you with the environment and the people and the experience of being able to move forward with your own individual destiny, rather than having to constantly gather and hoard or hold on to the things that we think we need in order to be whole or fully satisfied, fulfilled. And the thing that strikes me about what you said was about safety. You know, we're moving into this gate from the 51, the thunder, which in a particular way is that shock of sound. That thunderclap is like, it's a manifestation of feeling oncoming danger, you know, and this process of trust being so very important. This is interesting. I just want to bring it up now that we're in a sort of a new vessel, Bella. It feels to me that our, you know, from everyone's comments, we can kind of bring that more into our discussion. And Corinda's mentioning going on an inner journey with plant medicine in May to let go of the fear of death and integrate the human and the spiritual. And I think I've seen actually a lot of questions recently in various social media groups from people who have been on plant medicine journeys around how it impacts their experience. You know, some people talk about it, is this going to awaken my Kundalini? Or some people talk about, you know, piercing through different veils. And I want to share from my own experience from plant medicine journeys that I find the experience to always be incredibly personal and individual, even when touching aspects of our experience or reality that feels universal. For instance, I've had experiences where I've been able to see what appears to be a deeper truth behind reality. And the experience of seeing that is so kind of mind-blowing because of the newness of it and sort of the unfamiliarity with it. And also the feeling of it just hits me in a particular way of saying like, whoa, this is why. And then there's all of this understanding that arises, you know. And one of the things I've come to realize is that it's such a personal journey. And this archetype of the nomad and the gift of detachment are so incredibly useful when going through experiences like that, because, you know, speaking about attachments, I feel like as human beings, we're almost built to be attachment making machines. We, you know, someone mentioned an attachment to being human. We're attached to our identities. Even often when we're focused upon dissolving our ego or our perceived identity, we're still attached to that identity. And we're attached to the things in our lives, even the things that we're dropping behind us or lightly letting go into the world. You know, we never really get to experience that energetic reality until we have an experience of separation. And, you know, I think one of the things about life and death that is so profound is that it is the center of our experience of separation, which is right at the heart of the spiritual or the human wound that is carried by every single one of us. Well, I wonder if you have reflections about that, about separation, and about how death causes us to maybe experience our attachments in a new way.
Yeah, definitely. I do believe so. And death is probably the only definite, you know, separation in human form, if we are speaking with human form. So absolutely. I had to look at the repressive and the reactive shadow in the book because I didn't remember what they were. Because it is interesting. I haven't thought of the 42 as attachment a lot before. I know that the gift frequency is detachment. I know that the city is celebration. And the way that I've thought about it hasn't been attachment. Like I really have more felt into it as expectations and kind of wrongly directed energy in a way. Like, you know, you're kind of like, and I guess, you know, there is a rigidity in that, expecting things to go a certain way or be a certain way. But it has felt more like an energy that's moving than something that's just stuck and attached when I think about people with a 42 or transits with a 42. And I felt I wanted to just pull up so we can look at the elements, because that's what part of what we are doing now in the new kind of way we're doing lunar alchemy. So you see, I mean, wind over thunder, like the lightning and the wind. How stable is that? Like somehow it could maybe be in the illusion of holding on to something. But this for me, I mean, if there was one word that I would use here would be impulse. This is definitely an impulse. It's a lightning and it's wind taking that lightning somewhere. And it's almost like when you have walked the whole wheel, when you're in the 42, you've already done it so much. So it is like when the lightning strikes, you can take away with the wind. Like it's called increase. Why? Because you have everything already accumulated. So when the energy comes, you can go as the wind. Like that's really what I see in this one. And even when we look at the lower frequency, you know, uneasy agitation, it's full of energy. And I understand as well, like if you're in the repressive, you are going to be afraid of that impulse. So there's a freeze from that impulse. And then of course, you know, then there's going to be the attachment. And it's going to be, what I feel like I want to say is that it's going to be a very uncomfortable attachment, because you're attached to something that can't be contained. Like the uneasy agitation, you know, it's going to eat you from the inside, because this is an impulse that is here to increase. So the more you're going to hold it in the body, the worse it's going to be, you know. So it's here to bring destruction and also nourishment. And it is, you know, when it strikes, I believe that it's more about becoming adept to see how the energy moves, and by seeing, feeling how the energy moves, knowing when the cycle is closing and ending. So for me, more than anything, it is an observation of what the natural cycle would be and what is your mind artificial way of artificially trying to control that, because everything has a lifespan. Like I can even see that, like gray hair, you know, like I didn't have that a little while ago. You know, there is, everything has a lifespan. Or you look at any pet, you're going to see, you know, it takes 15 years. And it's not because they don't have the same human worries about aging as we do. They're still going to have like gray beard. They're still going to look a little tired. They're not going to be as energetic. So there are natural cycles. And I think I'm going to take this off because now I'm getting excited because like what I can see, what I feel it's so dangerous is the artificial way of living that we are creating, both in the way we live in our houses with the temperature that is completely, I could probably not live in Sweden if there was no way of making houses warmer. I could not live in Florida if there was no way of making houses colder. So the way that you think about Dubai, like it's in the desert. It's a completely artificial climate. And then everything that we do with our bodies, we can have bigger breasts, we can have like there's so many things that can be done artificially that we are getting used to it, or even gender can be changed. So for me, I'm not saying that all these things are wrong. It's not wrong to live in Florida. It's not wrong necessarily to change things about how you look or that feel like they go more hand in hand with your identity. And at the same time, when we start to do it, I believe that it is about being careful and very aware that we're going away from the natural cycles, from the natural life, the way that it would be if it got to mutate by itself. It could never just change like that. And that feels important as part of this discussion.
Yeah. I wonder if you might bring that image back again, Bella, because there's something with the lines that I wanted to bring up before we go into the elemental aspect. And I think what you're describing there is it's such a nuanced description of how we experience attachment or expectation. And when you consider the elemental quality of it, it begins to be a lot more clear, you know, like what is expectation? It's an attachment to something that hasn't occurred yet. So it isn't even real. So it's not, you know, we might be attached to our pet or our partner or our house or our car or whatever, our job, whatever it is. But all of those things are real in our experience. The expectation quality is that attachment of something that isn't yet in occurrence. And the lines of this particular hexagram are really, really interesting to me in how they develop as described in the I Ching. And, you know, here it says increase. And the way that increase is experienced, you can notice in this hexagram, there are 3 strong lines and 3 weak lines or broken lines. And those, if you take 3 strong lines and 3 broken lines, you have heaven and earth, 1 and 2, in terms of the progression of the I Ching and gene keys and everything. And the way you move from heaven over earth into this 42nd hexagram is the bottom strong line of heaven, which is 3 strong lines on top, drops down beneath the lower trigram. And that moves earth up, shifting the entire structure. And what is described is that heaven, which is the sky or the heavens in this quality, it's sacrificing a strong line for that which is below, for the earth to be brought up higher in its experience of evolution. And there's so many ways that relates to this gift of detachment, of being detached with the quality of identity. Heaven as heaven can't shift or change if it's codified and always fulfills the expectation of what it's going to be. As soon as that sacrifice of that bottom line moves down, then there's this whole new expression, and the thunder of planet Earth is moved into activity. So it's really, I mean, to me, this feels like it's a very powerful key into the process of life, from maybe a very abstract way of looking at life, where heaven, the creative, the spark, is sacrificing an aspect of its strength for the earth. And that results in this process of thunder, agitation, moving, along with the gentleness of the wind. It's really to me, it even feels like a potential process that we could begin to understand through our bodies in a particular way, through our breathing and our cycles of creation and of dissolution. And Bella, I feel like what you were mentioning about, you know, you can go skiing in Dubai, or you can, you know, get butt implants if you don't like the shape of your butt. You know, it's like these movements and how we relate with them are that movement of heaven and earth together in this process. It's like this very powerful image to me, and it feels like a powerful way that we could step into this process of understanding these cycles of life and death in a deeper way.
Yeah, there was a part of me that wanted to tie it back to separation, but it actually kind of ties it back to confusion for me a little bit. I don't think we need to continue that conversation, but when we start to live more artificially and we don't see the natural cycles, it actually often leads to confusion and losing that sense of self, which is the healthy sense of self, because suddenly there are almost like too many possibilities. And I know my mom says that sometimes when she was young, you go to the store and there's one type of coffee. Like now you can stand and look at all the different types of coffee. It's like 11 on the scale, and this is going to be 230 milliliters, but this is 90 because it's like, you know, you can get lost in an espresso store for a day for sure. And so there is some confusion that comes with that. And then the expectation of if I don't get this specific coffee that I want in my hotel, then I'm going to like be really angry and like want my money back. Like there, I don't know, there are those things. And I feel like separation, confusion, attachment, that just takes us away from the simple way of being human and living and evolving and closing doors and opening doors somehow.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've reached a moment. It's so hilarious to me that our conversation feels like it didn't have a definite start, and even now I don't really feel concluded. And almost as if we're like nomading or wandering our way like fools through our conversation.
And I felt we spent all this time with attachment when actually this is all about celebration somehow, because if we can celebrate the endings and the beginnings. That's when life changes. Like I'm sad every single day because I know that my dad is going to die so soon. I'm sad every single day. And then a part of me remembers as well, what I really know behind all that is that death is just an illusion. And that somehow, why am I making this so difficult, like so hard, not difficult, yeah, so hard inside, when somehow it's just a way of changing forms. So how do I get stuck with how sad it is to see like the physical body deteriorate, and yeah, so I wonder, there is something where I wonder how we can invite more celebration. And here it would be also a way to look in your chart, wherever you have a third line, you know, that's those keys that have a third line that has a decimal that is a 3. These are the places where you are a genius, where you have the imprint to celebrate. So go to your human design chart and look at those 26 activations and see, where am I a master celebrator? That's what I feel like really that the 42 today is impulsing us to do. It says, let's go and check, because you all have different flavors of celebration. And some people might find it in gate 4. Gate 4 is in the Ajna, and it has to do with understanding. Well, maybe that's when you have epiphanies, and when you understand something, when you finally see a pattern that's logic, then that's your celebration. That's what really makes you happy. And some other person has it somewhere else. So to know that there might, yeah, those keynotes where you have a third line, where you have celebration are important. And then I guess if you have the 42 or the 53, to see, and whether you have them or not, are you somebody who prefers to start, or somebody that prefers to end things? What are you most attached to? If you would have to look at yourself from the outside and screen yourself, are you more attached to ending things so that you're done, or starting things so that you feel like your life has a sense? Two different kinds of personalities, or you know, and tendencies that can be healthy or unhealthy depending on how extreme we get with them. So that feels I like this way of having a conversation with people that haven't been in here before, because it's going to change the dynamic a bit. And I hope that every time we're going to be able to play and to kind of see what's alive, and maybe it's not so much. I know that you are a 6-2, John, so for you, the one-on-one is, you know, the partnership is cool. And there's also something where I feel, let's celebrate the difference in dynamics that can happen when we're going to have different people every time, or hopefully the same people and more people, you know.
Absolutely. So for each of you who is joining us for the first time in this container, thank you for joining us for our discussion. We will be every Monday having our Lunar Alchemy discussion at 3 p.m. Eastern. And hopefully we'll be refining our process here, so that we can have a little smoother for those of you that maybe hopped in mid-discussion. We will be reminders for those of you
really
that
weird
are
again, John.
on list. Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's been like not so good, but it's okay when you speak slow. But as soon as you speak a little bit faster, we tend to like lose stuff.
How interesting. My regular pacing is like being supported by the technology, when, you know, like even when I listen to myself on recordings, I'm like, God, it's so slow.
I'm the opposite. I'm like, oh my God, it's so fast.
Well, I like to listen to our recordings at double speed, because I sound normal to myself, but you sound like Mickey Mouse, you know, like it's hilarious. Anyways, for those of you who are joining, we're going to move into the elemental transmission. So you can explore what that's about I'll put a link on the chat there, that will be up for just another couple moments if you want to check out what that's about. But we'll be here at 3 p.m. Eastern, and would love to have you back. And we appreciate all of your discussion contributions. And I'm sending loving presents to each of you. May your 42nd transit be so full of celebration. So for those of you who are solar members, we will go ahead and launch the second webinar. You can click on the link for the transmission in that members portal, and I should have that started momentarily. So we'll see you soon.